Welcome to the Jeremy and Andy Talk Movies podcast. I'm Jeremy.
I am Lee Cronin's Andy.
Nice. That's good to distinguish because there's just so many Andys. We need to know which
Yeah,
one
yeah,
you are.
correct.
Andy, I wanted to ask you if you had one of your kids get abducted and go missing for several years and then come back in a very grizzled, ugly, kind of disturbed form, could you still love them?
Um, I think, but I can promise you that I would be more proactive about the situation than the parents in this movie were.
Yeah. It's it's never a good sign when you're going to find your child who's been missing, and the first thing the doctor says is you need to be prepared for what you're going to see. It's like,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
that's
and
usually not
actually,
good.
that doctor may have undersold the situation, even though he did say that.
Yeah, he for sure undersold the situation
Yeah,
because yeah, he said you need to be prepared, but he didn't say, listen, you're gonna want to freak out, and that's totally acceptable and understandable. And maybe just go take a peek, back out, freak out, and then come back. That's the way we should do this. Let's just
it
tear
should
it
have. Yeah,
up,
it should be like, your daughter looks hideous, and this is terrifying.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. All right. So I guess I should mention that the movie we are talking about, which is probably already clear, and of course, if you clicked on this, you saw it in the title. We're talking about Lee Cronin's The Mummy.
That's just so
And
funny.
I love that we're already getting laughs. A lot of times we like to keep poker faces and wait for the reveal of Andy. Was this movie good? And sometimes you just can't help but start showing your cards a little bit
You got to tip your
beforehand.
hat a little bit sometimes.
Sometimes. All right, I'm going to give a brief summary and then we'll jump into that. That spoilery review of ours. As we talk about whether or not we like this. So while on assignment in Cairo, a family experiences tragedy when their oldest child, Katie, is abducted. 8 years later, Katie is found, but she is nearly unrecognizable in a ghoulish form. As they attempt to nurture her back into the family, the grim reality becomes increasingly apparent. What they got returned to them was not just their daughter, but a sinister spirit within her. Andy,
Yeah.
was Lee Cronin's The Mummy good?
Lee Cronin's The Mummy sucks. Also, we don't say ghoulish form on here near enough, so let's try and
Yeah.
do that more often. But no, this is neck and neck with Psycho Killer for me for worst movie of the year. There is so much to dissect here. This is awful on so many levels. I can't wait to dive into this with you.
Okay, wow. I'll be honest, Andy. I mean, like, I don't like this movie, but I was not certain how you were going to feel about it because my note was this gave me real Bring Her Back vibes, where I was like, after we watched Bring Her Back, I was like, I don't like it, but this movie's just not for me. When I say I don't like horror movies, this is kind of what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
And when I was watching this, I was like, I don't know, maybe horror movie fans will like this, but it's not for me. And it's interesting to hear you say, no, apparently it's not for horror movie fans either.
It's not because it's just like we talked about. You talk about it all the time with Mission Impossible, and we talked about it with what else did I? Mario. It's like we live in a world now where there are a lot of we live in a weapons world, a post weapons world, where it has been proven that there can be good original horror with smart, well written, interesting characters. And this just had none of that. And there is so much to dissect here. I think first and foremost the fact that this is not a mummy movie. This is an Evil Dead movie.
Yeah, which is really funny because Lee Cronin, who I was not familiar with his work, I've become familiar with the name Lee Cronin simply because of the title of this movie, but I guess he did an Evil Dead movie
Yes.
and was talked into doing this movie instead of a sequel to the Evil Dead, but
So he
essentially
just
just
did a
they
sequel
didn't.
to the Evil
Yeah,
Dead.
right.
It's just really strange. This has been the second really strange thing that's happened with Hollywood this year, right after releasing Ready or Not 2 and They Will Kill You in back to back weeks. This is right up there to me where it's like, yeah, like this guy turned down the chance to make an Evil Dead sequel just to make an Evil Dead movie. Like, it is so strange to me that they call this movie The Mummy.
Yeah, and that's definitely, I mean, not surprisingly, also in my notes to talk about was that I think this movie would have been a lot better served if it was not titled The Mummy.
Yeah.
If it was just associated, not even being associated with that name, because yeah, you watch this and you go like, I get that mummy lore goes beyond even like sort of our typical interpretation of it, our more recent Hollywood interpretations. And they were like trying to dig through some of that and all, almost give this like the Nosferatu treatment for vampire movies.
Hmm.
But two things about that. One, it wasn't good and interesting, like Nosferatu at least had a unique style and everything to it. And the other thing is like, there's a reason we made the mummy movies what they were. That was the interesting version of a mummy.
Hmm.
This is it's basically a possession movie. This is basically just a
Yeah.
demon possession movie.
Yeah, you're right. Like I think I would hate this movie no matter what, but I think it just kind of adds that extra layer of dislike to this movie that it just feels like a cheat that it's called The Mummy. Like it's just really really strange to me.
Yeah, I so let's talk a little bit about Lee Cronin. I mean, like, his role in this film, not his history or anything, because again, I'm not really familiar with his history. He wrote and directed this. And
Hmm.
my note was like, I give him more credit for his directing than his writing. Because I
Hmm.
do think like the movie had that feel of something that was well made, that it, and we'll talk more about this, but it did have a pace that took its time. It was a patient movie, too much so to its detriment. But again, we'll get into that. But the story was just really lacking.
Yeah,
And I'm still confused about why anything happened that happened in this movie.
yeah, yeah. There, yeah. So it's like again, I'm going to use weapons as an example, which is a high bar to compare a movie to, but you watch something like Weapons, and it really feels like you're just watching a story unfold, and things are just playing out like, even though it's a crazy situation, like things are playing out like people are behaving in ways that people would probably behave in a situation like that. This just feels like a screenplay. Like, you know what I mean? Like, this just feels like, okay, now this happens. And we'll get into a lot of this, I'm sure, but there's just so many annoying things about like the convenience of when like they need a character to be out of the way, they're just out of the way, even though they're all in the same house. Like, you need the littlest daughter to disappear for a while, she just disappears for a while. Whereas something like Weapons is just like a really well thought out movie, and it like this movie breaks both your rule of like you either need a believable characters in unbelievable situations or vice versa, and I just doesn't do either one, and there's so many things wrong with this movie.
Yeah. I do think, again, the positives of this movie, I think there is some good direction, some cool visuals, which isn't enough to save it. I do think it's mostly well acted, which isn't enough to save it because the actors aren't playing, like you said, believable characters. So, um, you know, it, I I just keep going back to this. Like the girl Katie, as she comes back as the mummy, I was never clear like what are we rooting for in this movie?
Mm-hmm.
Like what are we hoping happens? Or even like what's the actual peril in this movie? And maybe that's the bigger thing is I was never sure what the peril was. Like, is this
Mm-hmm.
girl going to try to like kill everyone in the family? I don't know. Like, what is her actual powers? What is it that she's doing? Is she slowly unlocking powers as she's I don't know. It was so unclear what was actually happening.
It absolutely was. And I'm also too like just as someone who consumes a lot of horror movies, I'm really tired of and like haunted house movies do this too, but a lot of like possession movies, like you said, do this where it's like so she has she's possessed by some, random evil spirit because, movies can always just come up with some name for an evil spirit. And you're right, it's never clear about what her powers are. And I think it's so annoying when movies do the thing where like we just very gradually, because we need to advance the plot, she displays like little bits of power. But then at the end of the movie you find out she just has this, like she's just like floating and she can like basically like hypnotize her siblings or like kind of like possess her siblings. It's like, well then why didn't you just do that like the second she got to the house? Like if that's what she
Yeah.
wants to do. And yeah, so I'm just agreeing with you, there's no clear motivations or points for any of this.
Yeah. And there's little bits that I guess you could say like, okay, well, part of it was, I guess, and I never really understood it. It was a wrapping, but it was also like part of her skin with all the
I don't
ancient
know.
writing, and that writing was like basically incantations that were supposed to help keep the spirit at bay. So like that's why she was peeling them off her skin, and it was helping her become more powerful. I think, but then that also just goes away. Spoiler at the very end when they kind of win by transferring the spirit into the dad, and then the dad's going to go and transfer it into the lake. And it's like, well, aren't they supposed to wrap it in these incantations and bury it in the certain kind of,
Yeah.
like they just sort of throw out the rules at the end in order to have a satisfying climax, but it's not satisfying because I'm sitting there just as a very analytical movie watcher. I'm going, what are the rules? Give me some rules so I can understand what's happening here.
Yeah, and I'm way less of an analytical movie watcher than you are, and that was still frustrating to me. Like I don't care what the movie is, and I don't care how ridiculous the rules are. Just establish some kind of rules and follow them. It doesn't matter to me if they're the most ridiculous thing in the world. Just play within the, like we praise like the MCU does that. When they were in their prime, like it can be ridiculous, and Thanos can be using this glove to go from planet to planet, but they had rules and they followed them. Weapons, same thing. Like it's just so annoying when everyone can just do anything whenever they need to, or they can do whatever they need to when the plot allows, but when the plot doesn't need them to be able to do anything, they can't. And it's really lazy and frustrating.
Yeah. I'll tell you what other kind of trope I'm a little tired of, and this one's it's not as big a deal, but it's just the house that has all the like secret, through the walls, tunnels and
Yeah.
stuff, and it's like, how many people have actually ever been in a house that has these things?
How many houses have you ever been into that have these like basically like trap doors, and then you can just stand fully straight up and run at full speed through these areas? That was
Yeah,
stupid.
seems like a real, just architectural flaw to have that
Yeah, it
much
was
wasted space in the walls.
really, really stupid. That was obnoxious.
Yeah. Um, so this movie, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, which is usually something we talk about at the end, but I just want to talk about the fact that it's a $22 million budget. And at first I was like, oh, that's actually, not too bad for a movie that's a big spectacle movie like this. And then I started thinking about it. I was like, well, is it a big spectacle movie? Like, it really is a small story. Like, it takes place largely in just this house with just this family, and it really doesn't expand out a whole lot from there.
Hmm.
And yeah, so I mean, like, again, I know what they were going for was something a little more small and contained and like a more intimate horror style mummy movie. But that's again, it kind of goes back to the mummy being this big, cultural like monster movie figure to make it such a small thing. It's just so bizarre.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's really, really strange. And then that led to one of the problems, like I already talked about, where it's like they're all in this house together, and it just feels like characters just kind of come and go as the script needs them to. And there could be some big, huge thing going on, and it's always when like mom's in the basement and she doesn't hear anything that's going on in this house, even though there's this huge events happening. And then, like I said, the youngest sister, like they kind of want her out of the way in the movie for a little bit, so she's just gone. Like that stuff is just very, very lazy to me. When it's like, how do we deal with, we don't need the little sister in this scene. I don't know. She's just gone in another room of the house or whatever. And that made me sound nitpicky, but like a lot of the movie is that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the horror of the movie is just that sort of disturbing, gross visuals going on
I wanted
that
to
really
talk
don't
about
have
this,
much of
how
a
gross
reason.
this movie
So,
is.
there's the scene where the younger daughter, when she's kind of possessed by the older sister, she's had one loose tooth, but she starts just pulling out all her teeth.
It was
And then
just
she's like,
gross.
she just takes all her teeth out, and you just got all these teeth on the floor. Her mouth is all bloody. And then she goes over to the grandmother's casket and steals her grandmother's dentures and goes over to her parents with a bloody mouth and then smiles with these big adult sized teeth in her mouth. And it's like, okay, like, I get the visual you were going for here and why that's like, ooh, you're going to get some shock value, but it's like, why? Why is this part of the story?
Yeah.
Can you give me any real reason why the character's doing this?
All that stuff with the grandma and her funeral at the house was so that was almost like unintentional comedy, I thought. And then, so like, I guess we're basically already into spoilers, right? Is that okay with you?
Yeah, I think we're there.
So it's so stupid. So this movie is also so overly dependent on these parents being the two biggest morons in the world. And there's nothing more frustrating in a horror movie specifically when somebody sees something that's really, really wrong or problematic and they just keep it to themselves. So, to back up for a second, before this funeral, the dad is in Katie's room and he lifts up the rug and there's just like this disgusting, like bloody, gooey mess under this rug. It's clearly a big thing. And he just kind of puts the rug down and doesn't say a word to anybody about it. And then during this funeral, Katie like breaks through that area of like gross, gooey stuff, jumps down into the grandma's casket, like bites her neck, and so like all the embalming fluid and stuff starts leaking out, and then she just gets on all fours and starts licking it up like she's a dog. And then we see like a lady vomit, which is just really unpleasant to see. And then it cuts to like later that night, and the family's just all kind of like chilling. And the mom is like packing up, and she's talking to the younger sister. She's like, "Yeah, we're gonna get out of here." And nobody's near as bothered by what just happened as they should be. So then everyone just looks stupid. And there's a lot of scenes like that in this movie. But to go to back what you're saying, it was just like that was just really gross for absolutely no reason whatsoever. And just really off-putting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, as I'm thinking through it, I'm trying to think if there are any legitimate scares in this movie, or if it's all just sort of gross gags.
Yeah,
And I
like
can't really think of anything that was kind of like a legitimately like tense or scary moment.
no, I there's none. Um there's a really bad chase scene towards the end where like the son of the family is also like possessed or whatever, and he's chasing the mom through these ridiculous, and there's just no like suspense or anything, and then she just kind of sneaks up on him because this movie also does like the really lazy like they just have this wonderful shot from the hospital of medicine that can just immediately knock anybody out. You know, where like the hospital is just like, here you go, here's a ton of these shots that'll just make everyone who comes in contact with them comatose. And she just kind of sneaks up on the son and hits him with that shot, and then you don't see the son again for a really long time, and all that stuff just drove me crazy.
Yeah. Um, so we've alluded to this a little bit earlier, and it's a point that we both made before we even started the podcast, and I think it's a really important one. Is one of this movie's biggest flaws is its runtime is too long,
Yeah.
and not just by a little. I mean, this movie is 2 hours and 14 minutes. You could easily have shaved 30 minutes off this movie.
Yeah, this should
And
be a 90-minute movie.
yeah, I'm not going to say that this movie becomes good if you shave that off, but when a movie's not very good and then it drags, it just becomes that much more frustrating. Like it's easier to tolerate a movie that's struggling, but at least it gets there and gets the point across and gets done faster. Um, Especially because I felt like this movie had promise early in the movie. Like I thought, like the setup and stuff, it was again, like I said, I think it's well acted and well made. So the whole premise of the daughter disappearing, I thought the best scene was him trying to chase down
Mm-hmm.
when she gets abducted and there's the sandstorm coming. And I was like, okay, I'm in on all this. It just all fell apart when she came back in mummy form, and nothing from that point had to follow any rules or logic. And then it all just sort of dragged on too long. The like slow, very slow burn reveal of like something's wrong when, I mean, like, come on, one look at her, something's wrong. And it just, yeah, it took way too long and wasn't as interesting as it needed to be.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I had no problem with that first 20, 25 minutes and up to her disappearing. And I didn't even mind that that you learn a little bit about this family before she goes missing, and that's fine. And, the mom and dad, they go and talk to like the Cairo, like police or investigators and stuff. No problem with that. You're exactly right. They went too overboard with Katie's appearance right out of the gate. Like if she would have gradually, maybe it's like, she looks like she looks, and they just have no reaction to it at all. And then the poor mom character, and I'm like you, I don't really fault anybody's performance. I just fault the screenplay that they had to work with. The poor mom just looks like the biggest doofus in the world in this movie because the dad's like Katie does some really disturbing things, and the dad's like, hey, like, we're not equipped for this. And then she gets mad, so she just kind of looks like a jerk. And you don't really buy her as like the protective mom, so it's
Yeah.
just kind of like she just comes across like a moron, like, no, we can handle this. And you're like, your daughter looks like the girl from The Exorcist in the last 20 minutes of The Exorcist. Like, you clearly can't handle this. Like, so then
Yeah.
it just does the thing where it makes everyone look dumb.
It does, and I hadn't really even thought about it. Like I don't know why it didn't immediately click with me in the movie, but I think because it was the movie, I was just rolling with it. But the doctor, the original doctor says what she needs is just for you to like, reincorporate with her the family and get a sense of normal again. And it's like you got like, oh okay, but then you think about it, you're like that's absolutely not medically what she needs.
No,
This girl clearly has a lot of medical needs. I mean, for goodness sakes, you would never send her home and have the parents trying to clip her like overly long, gross, grown out nails with her really fragile skin that ends up leading to a really gross scene. But
it
it's like
does.
they're 100% taking care of all this stuff medically. They're keeping her under watch for days. They're hooking her up to all sorts of machines, and testing her. Like none of that. The doctor's just going, what she needs is just to be at home and be treated normal. That doesn't make any sense.
That's what I was gonna say. This movie just sabotages every character with its screenplay. Because yeah, you're just like, it makes the doctors look like buffoons. It makes the parents look like morons for not being like, absolutely not. Like, we're not leaving here until we get some. She gets some medical help, and even like this is probably just a really dumb nitpick, but like yeah, the doctor's like, yeah, just go home, give her some hugs, and spend some time with her. And then it cuts to the parents like taking poor Katie up the stairs in this wheelchair, and they're doing the worst job ever of taking her up
Okay,
the stairs in this wheelchair.
yes, and the whole time I'm sitting there going, is it not easier for the dad to just pick her up and carry her?
Yes,
All the it feels like the longest scene of them struggling to get her up the, and then the next cut, he is holding her and setting her in the bed, and I'm like, so you could have done that. You could have done that from the beginning.
yeah, that was really weird to me. It was like it felt like that was a 2 minute long scene of just like thud, thud, thud up the stairs. It's like no wonder this girl's trying to possess you all and kill you. You just took her up the side note too. Like I just felt so bad for the actress that had to play Katie, and then just had to sit there like this the whole movie, and like she just has some terrible lines where she's like, "Don't worry, Grandma, it's fun to be dead," and you're just like, "Oh gosh, this poor
Yeah,
actress."
yeah, and I'm certain that she had to endure, half of her days in the makeup chair to put on all that look,
I mean, kudos
just to
to
go out
her
and
for
do that.
being willing to
Yeah,
go through all that, but
yeah. Um, Gosh. So I will say critics have largely agreed with us. It's a little higher than maybe we would make it sound, but it's a 45% on Rotten Tomatoes.
mhm.
And I don't know, like I don't know what I expected with this one. I think for some reason I was still surprised it was that low, just because it kind of has that like A24 we're trying something different kind of feel to it that critics sometimes like. Um, but obviously they did not buy into this one. Audiences 77% on this, Andy.
I don't get that at all. But what do I know?
Yeah, I don't know. It is shocking to me.
Yeah,
Uh, so I mentioned earlier $22 million budget. Andy, can you tell us anything about how it's doing at the box office?
I don't know worldwide, but I know this weekend in the United States it opened to like 12.5 to $13 million. So I mean, that's fine. It's I don't know. I don't always mean to be repetitive, but it's a lot of it's going to be telling in that second weekend. I really don't foresee this having any kind of big holdover, or a lot of like people going to see it and then telling their friends like you have to go see Lee Cronin's The Mummy. So I don't know, man. It's that like I do always say though, and this is one thing horror can do is it can keep the budget low. So that'll obviously work in its favor, but I don't know. Not an amazing opening, but in some ways maybe better than I would have thought because this is just a weirdly. I mean, I saw this trailer like Get Ready or Not and They Will Kill You, And I was just like, the Mummy, and it doesn't even look like a Mummy movie. So kind of a win, maybe, that it opened to as much as it did.
Yeah. I think it. I mean, we we talked about we talked about it before because the Invisible Man was like a surprise good movie, and then uh, Wolfman not quite as good, but it's okay. Like so there's kind of this trend of taking horror classics and trying to reinvigorate them. Of course, Nosferatu, which has no connection to those, is sort of a similar thing though. And so when this was coming out, it's like, oh, they're trying to give the Mummy the same treatment. Like, let's take it, this familiar horror movie thing and kind of give it a new, updated twist to it. And my guess is that's what people had in mind to have them go want to see this was Invisible Man, Wolfman, Nosferatu, those type of movies. But this is, of those four, the worst by far.
Oh, by far. And just to add to the weirdness of this movie, they've already announced that they're going to do a continuation of the Brendan Fraser Mummy series. Radio Silence is going to do one. And we've got two Evil Dead movies coming out in like the next year and a half. So it just really, this is just an all time weird thing to me that this movie even exists. I mean, there are parts of this movie, like when the grandma, spoiler, when the grandma like rises from the dead. I mean, that is literally just Evil Dead. Like, they don't even try and make it anything different. That is straight up Evil Dead stuff. And then like, like she's standing over like the cop um that's trying to help with all this, and the cop kind of looks up, and like I think she's even like dripping like grossness on her. I mean, this is just Evil Dead. It's so strange. And now the fact that we're getting Evil Dead movies really soon, it just I just don't get it. I don't get what they were going for. I don't really even understand why the studio allowed this to be so much like an Evil Dead movie when the Evil Dead franchise is still alive and well. It's really strange.
It is very strange. It's, of course, very strange when you have a movie called The Mummy and you go, people are going to have a hard time disassociating this from franchises that already exist called The Mummy. Of course, the Brendan Fraser one was not the first Mummy movie, but it's the one most people associate with.
Mm-hmm.
There was even a Tom Cruise Mummy that didn't work, but
It didn't work at all.
but I love reading. I think I read this in the trivia that for like days leading up to the release, the promotion materials for this movie were having to explain that Brendan Fraser's not in this movie because it's not related to that Mummy series. And
Yeah.
anytime your promotion has to start really focusing on the movie franchise you're not a part of, that's
It's
not a good sign.
correct. I wonder if that's part of why it has Lee Cronin's name in the front of it, because this guy does not
Yeah.
have the resume to have the kind of pull to have his name in front of the title of the movie.
Yeah. So yeah, from the trivia I learned that as well that the Lee Cronin name in front of it was is it James Wan? Is he I think he's the producer of this and
Yep.
he's a more well-established horror movie name obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but he's the one who recruited Lee Cronin to do this movie basically, and it was his decision to put Lee Cronin's name in front of it. And apparently Lee Cronin was like hesitant at first, but he was convinced that it was needed to distinguish itself from the other Mummy movies. But the problem is exactly what you're saying. When you're not a known name, putting your name in front of it doesn't help people go, "Oh, that's the Mummy movie I'm getting into." It's more just like, "Who? Why
Who?
is this
What?
Lee Cronin's the Mummy? Why is that on there like that?" So,
This whole thing is baffling. However, I will say one positive thing about this movie. It did teach me that if a scorpion ever rips out through my throat and I still need to talk to someone, all I have to do is jam my fingers in the hole in my throat from which the scorpion crawled out of, and I could still, I could still podcast with you if I needed to. I just have to jam my fingers into the hole in my throat, and then I can talk just fine. So I am glad to know that.
right. Yeah. That is good to know. Um, I mentioned earlier that this movie reminded me of Bring Her Back, and just like Bring Her Back, there was a lot of important exposition done from a VHS tape. So
Okay, that's
that's another
another
thing.
thing too. Like that VHS tape stuff was bad. Like that was just really bad. It's like it made even worse by the fact that this, very much is like Cairo desert. Like not that they can't have VHS tapes and stuff there, but it felt like the VHS and the camcorder just really didn't fit in with the rest of the setting, I guess, and the situation. That was really bad.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, overall, that's that's the gist, the sum of what we're saying is this movie just did not work. Um, we'd never needed a mummy movie, and you know, if we didn't need one, you shouldn't have come with one unless you had something really good and original to say. I think that was maybe the most telling thing about this is that James Wan recruited Lee Cronin to do a mummy movie before Lee Cronin had like an idea. He had to be talked into, why don't you come figure out a mummy movie for us? And almost anytime you start with that, with, hey, we need a movie about this, it ends up being bad. If it's not like, hey, I've got an idea and so I want to make this, that's usually where your good movies are going to come from.
Yeah, and it's like then that's where we get this whole thing of like it felt like he really couldn't come up with an idea, so he was like, you know what, my last movie was an Evil Dead movie, so I'll just do that again.
Yeah, and I think he was probably thinking he was going to make another Evil Dead movie, and so when he pivoted to this, I wonder if he's like, I can kind of pull some of my ideas I had and just incorporate them in.
It's
But
exactly what it feels like. Very, very strange. Just all around. The
yeah,
whole deal with this is just strange.
yeah, I can say with relative confidence that I'm pretty sure that Lee Cronin's next movie will not have Lee Cronin in the title.
I hope not. I actually read online where he is on record saying he wants to do a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. And I'm just like, please just leave that alone. Please don't do that.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're gonna call that a pod because we've gone 30 minutes on this movie, and that's you know, we
That's
said the
fine.
movie took too much time, and we don't need to take too much time on it. Uh, there is, there's good movies ahead, so that's what we'll look forward to. We're starting to we're getting closer to that like sort of summer movie season, Andy. So
We're getting
I'm
there.
excited for that ahead. Um, we may have an episode later this week. We'll see. But if not, we'll be back next week with something. And you know, Andy, always good talking movies with you, man.
Never disappoints.
All right. Thank you everybody for joining us. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.